Welcome back to New Persuasive Words. I'm Scott Jones.
And I'm Bill Bohr.
Bill,
Hi,
what's
Scott.
going on?
Happy
We're
Flag
both very
Day.
casually dressed, just both in long sleeve t-shirts.
I was outside working, so I was.
On Shabbat. I wasn't.
Well, you know what?
was
This is what I have to say. My wife grew up suburban urban. All right, so here in Vermont,
What does that mean? What is suburban urban?
It means it means that she
like Marion Station,
she didn't pick up a
Pennsylvania.
shovel. She's not really a shovel person.
I'm not a shovel person.
Well, I know. Well, but she anyway. So I had to put in a new mailbox because the mailbox is just one too many encounters with snowplows. So anyway, I said we had to pour some concrete, and she was all excited. So she's telling our family, "Hey, I'm laying concrete." I said, "Well, first of all, honey, if you're going to brag about your construction abilities, it's pouring concrete. You lay block, you pour concrete." But she signed up to go on our mission trip. She's all excited. So, and she thinks like an engineer. She's better at that, solving those kind of things than I am. So anyway, but
that's good.
So good. Your good friend Laura, who you probably talk to more than you talk to me.
That's not true.
I'm just kidding. But anyway,
no, you and I are the constant. If we don't talk for a day and a half, that's huge. That's huge.
What?
If we don't talk for a day and a half, that's where you call out you're looking for me at that point.
I'm looking for you. I'm calling ICE. I'm calling the FBI. I'm saying
ICE. Look, man, I don't hang out at Home Depot, man. That's where you really.
Well, so I was going to say, I didn't know if you were going to be able to podcast today because I couldn't decide if you were going to either be marching in the No King March in Philadelphia, or getting free tank rides down in DC, or at the celebration honoring your favorite Shadrow loving theologian. I saw that she was being.
Yeah, Shadrow. Yeah,
that is one of my favorite off recording conversations we ever had.
I'll say that. Yeah, that's. Well, you know what, Bill? A couple things. I feel like me in a tank is not a far cry from Michael Dukakis. It's not really a great. Look
just don't
put
the hat. Just don't put the hat on.
Yeah, the helmet's not right. And I was getting ready to go to the protest, but it's overcast. It's drizzling. I don't protest.
Right? Drizzle. That is the spirit of the Minutemen right there.
Yeah, right there. I'll tell you, that's what they said in Selma. Hey, we shall overcome. Wait, it's overcast. No, we shan't.
You know what? The British are coming, but it's
overcast.
It's damp. It's for April morning.
68 degrees. It's downright chilly. It's raining. It's not safe out there.
They might be shooting back.
I was gonna go though. Seriously, I was thinking, I'm not for kings. I actually don't even know if I can say that. Maybe I don't know. It depends on who I've read last.
Yeah, you do. Part of what makes you inquisitive, you learn by embracing what you read. Yeah. Sometimes it does have it has some short-term negative effects for those of us who like you and talk to you.
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, this is, by the way, so I'm doing a little tally for the Donald Trump Nobel Peace Prize. 0 for 2. It's so Ukraine is still raging, and we've got clandestine strikes. Very cool, James Bond kind of stuff. This is, and I understand that Israel's attack on Iran. Trump said it would have never happened if he was president.
Right.
Well, I mean, this is another thing. How do you build? They built a drone factory in Iran. Like that strikes me as how do you do that?
Well, they've been selling drones. They've been selling stuff to Russia. Russia's been using Iranian stuff against Ukraine.
No, but I'm saying Israel built a drone factory.
Oh, how they
Iran.
built it?
Yeah. How do you do that? I mean, what do you? At the point where they're laying concrete, you watch it. You see a couple of Jews laying concrete. Right. This is you what Bill Maher say? It was so great and Religulous. this Cuban cult leader says, "Come on, I see this guy who thinks he's Jesus Christ." He says, "Come on, I see these people with these bumper stickers. My boss is a Jewish carpenter." And Bill Maher goes, "How silly. Jewish carpenter. Jews hire carpenters." So no, if you see some Jews laying concrete in Iran,
could be
the security forces probably you probably one of their point of the car. How do you have a drone factory?
Well, right.
That's fantastic.
Well, right, and I think there's plenty of opposition in Iran to the regime. I do know. I guess it's also hard when you're Donald Trump to make a deal with the Iranians when Netanyahu has the chief negotiator killed in the first round of the bombing.
I heard they did that in The Apprentice sometimes.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. By the way,
but then again, isn't just part of the thrill and excitement of living in a totalitarian regime is room for advancement, constant room for advancement.
Right.
One day you're radio officer third class, the next day you're chief negotiator. I mean, these are.
Or if you're prime minister of a shaky democracy, you keep a war going so you don't go to jail. You keep finding new
Israel's not a shaky democracy.
Oh, it is. They by their own admission, it's a shake by their own admission.
We didn't even shaky. How would we rate that?
There are democratic principles and norms that have been under assault. I mean, it would be worse if we'd be talking about this more if it hadn't been for October 7th. But in Israel media and different, they were actually using the word civil war. They were heading for civil war.
Oh, was this over the review thing, the judicial review thing?
Judicial review, but other things as well. There's been a whole series of our president isn't the only one who's been undermining democracy, an elected person undermining democracy. So no, there's a lot of talk among Israel.
Bill, let me just say this: with the intelligence of the average American, I'm for undermining democracy everywhere we can. I am for.
You're on a roll. By the way, we should mention the tragedy that happened in Minnesota.
It's crazy.
I mean, it's just it is very frightening. Very, I mean, it's just political assassinations. It's just horrific, and right. So, and again,
and the loss also of the great Beach Boy,
Brian Wilson.
Brian Wilson was
and Sly Stone. Sly Stone died a few days earlier.
Brian Wilson, David Zoll, in his book, The Big Relief, his most recent book, has a very moving. That's the epilogue of the book about what Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys meant, how that affected his faith. It's very interesting. So.
Yeah.
So, by the way, I'll just say one thing too. The Victor Davis Hanson, who's I forget, he's a fellow at Stanford over a classical historian. I know he's done some stuff at the Great Hillsdale College. No, but he has this book, Culture and Carnage, and it's a history book. I mean, it's about warfare, and it covers 9 wars throughout history, or whatever. But I was listening to a podcast where they were summarizing some of his insights in that book, and about liberal democracies. And he said, liberal democracies are pacific, right? They're pacific in nature. They don't want to start wars. They don't want to be in antagonistic, militarized relationships because they want economic productivity. Right, they want their citizens sort of pursuing relatively libertarian ends, right? In these sorts of things. And so they don't want the way illiberal societies sometimes are inspired by militarism and sorts of things. But I mean, who knows? We have a military parade now. By the way, Trump said, what did he say? I mean, like when Chris Wilker was asking him about it, we got the best tanks, okay? We got the best missiles. I mean, we have the best submarines, and people should see. I think if you drag the submarine down Pennsylvania Avenue, that might void the warranty, okay?
I would, I would go see that submarine parade.
Cool.
That would be, I actually, that would be nice to see that going. Anyway.
But we're having but his point is that basically, but when you provoke them and you threaten them existentially, they tend to obliterate you, like the Allies did in World War I to Germany, just eviscerated it, right? I mean, dismantled it. And as we did in World War II with Germany and Japan, I mean, we eviscerate. And I mean, we see this with Israel and Iran. I mean, you can only a liberal democracy is going to be in the shadow of existential threats so long, and then it's gonna react. And sometimes you're surprised by this because they are pacific, right? I mean, they do tend to eschew conflict. Liberal societies don't go to war with each other, right? They try they just don't do that.
I just think because of the situation Israel is in, it's a different kind of. I mean, it's one part liberal democracy and one part Sparta. Just
because everybody's in the military.
Yeah, because of the geography too. I mean, there's a sense where
you're surrounded by.
I mean, one of the things Daniel Hartman says all the time is, now the great thing about us Israelis is that we have a great sense of denial. In other words, we can be in a bomb shelter one day and in a cafe the next day. And that's part of how you have to live in that society. But I do think there's a sense where, and there's blood in the water with Israel right now too. I think there's a sense where, and I think that's, and again, you and I talked a little bit about how vulnerable. I mean, Iran's vulnerable. I don't think I would have had anything out in the open if it was Iran. I think, if anything, you should learn a little bit about preemptive strikes, right? I mean, the 1967 war, the Egyptian Air Force never got off the ground, and Iran's air defenses were gone.
Right. Exactly. Yeah,
so I think there's a sense where they have a huge army on paper, and it's a huge country, but so that's an interesting thing to think about.
Huge armies on paper, right? I mean, this is the thing where now, I mean, if you're a nation like Iran, you've got numbers, or look at Russia. I mean, Ukraine just goes in these trucks and just gets drones. I mean, this is stuff you can get at Best Buy. And listener, and by the way, for some of our listeners, we know who you are. Don't get any ideas. Some of you shouldn't be at Best Buy. All right, some of you shouldn't own drones. We know you. Most of you write to Bill. A lot of you shouldn't have drones. But I'm glad our Ukrainian brothers and sisters do. But this is one of those things, right? You could just try. You get a truck full of drones.
What do you think? Do you think the next Bin Laden out there isn't paying attention to this?
Right.
What a drones? So it's a dangerous.
Have you ever flown a drone? Piloted a drone?
I have. I never liked the automatic airplane thing, but Laura has one. So she writes curriculum, and they were doing a drone unit, so she got a drone for something, and so
that's cool. Can you mount a camera on it? Because she could spy on your neighbors.
We don't have any neighbors, so that's
somewhere. There's someone near.
Down the hill. No, there are. You know what I saw online the other day? That somebody a riptide took someone out, and someone on the beach happened to have their drone they were playing with, and they took a flotation device, sent it out, and saved their life. Now that's cool.
Look, drones are cool. I mean, but this is the thing, right? Where you have these big conventional armies, and that's why. Like, why aren't we? Why, we don't need more money on tanks and stuff like this. Let's just spend the entire Pentagon budget at Best Buy.
No, we don't need. We certainly don't need aircraft carriers. Not like we used to. And as you say, I don't know. Did you ever watch Modern Family?
It wasn't a huge Modern Family.
I thought the writing was really good, but there was a neighbor who had a drone that was spying on Sophia, whatever her character's name was. She was a beautiful woman, and all the men were getting so we're gonna have to get some. We're gonna have to go talk to them. And the last scene of the show was the drone's flying over a swimming pool. She pulls out a gun. She's Colombian, and she takes it out of the air with her handgun.
This is the limits of the drone. Right. I mean, this is
one shotgun shell will take them out. But anyway, so our topic for today.
Our topic for today, but I say what ChatGPT described our topic, and I was
they did a
we
fine
can't
job.
Live up to that. I was like, I don't know that we have that in us.
What about I saw you published what AI said about you.
Oh, yeah, that was
they have a very high view of you, Scott.
Well, and some people, it's very interesting. a lot of people said very nice things, and somebody wrote to me, a pastor who had left a church over theological. He was an evangelical, and I think he had some evolution, and he parted company his church and starting a new life. I'm still a believer. He does a podcast and stuff. He's a very interesting guy. I don't know who he is, but I kind of followed him. But he wrote this meaningful response on Instagram and said that he had binged every piece of content. So I'm guessing he listened to the show some. And as he was driving this, and has listened to like the Corpus, the Scott Jones Corpus. And so, yeah, we say hello to you. I'm not going to out him. I'm not going to dox him, as they say. But it's just interesting. I mean, you know, people, I guess people listen to stuff we do out there.
Yeah.
Public service announcement. People listen.
Keep doing it.
This is yeah. No, so it's Trinity Sunday.
Yes.
I did love that ChatGPT said, this isn't just Bill and Scott aren't just doing a church calendar check-in. I like it was even snarky. I'm pretty into that. I thought it was so. Yeah, Bill, this isn't just some church calendar check-in. We actually, it's Trinity Sunday, where Leslie Newbegin was talking about some place he was at. He was touring, I want to say Armenia or I forget where, and he was in this monastery, and the pulpit, they said it was an old monastery, in the pulpit there was this inscription. I'm sure this is apocryphal or something, but maybe it's not. I mean, I remember reading it actually he wrote this, I think. So, but it said, from this pulpit that the abbot or whatever gave a sermon on every Sunday, except with the exception of Trinity Sunday, because the topic is too inscrutable or something. And of course, Dorothy Sayers said the Father incomprehensible, the Son incomprehensible, the Spirit incomprehensible, the whole thing incomprehensible. So I would say this is not one of the most popular topics for pastors, for parishioners,
right?
For people celebrating liturgical events. But I wonder, Bill, can the Trinity save democracy? Is what we need. More Trinitarian theology to rescue us from the imperial horizon, the imperial threat that seems on the horizon. Is even now, we have a military parade going. Do they wear dress uniforms for that?
I don't know.
Because like in North Korea, when they do it, those guys all look really good in the
usually wear parade attire, right? That's
the goose step boots and everything.
Yeah.
Do you think they had to get those? Do you think Trump's like, look, these boots are not very, I like the boots that the totalitarians have. Okay, they've got better boots. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like,
did you hear what Rand Paul said? Someone asked Rand Paul if he's going to the parade. He goes, "Yeah, I'm not really into goose stepping."
When Rand Paul becomes the voice of moral clarity, we're in trouble.
We're in trouble. We are in trouble.
We're in trouble. Rand Paul.
Right. So the Trinity, one of the things that, the idea of mystery, right? That you just quoted Dorothy Sayers, and that is, I think, part of the power of the Christian tradition, and yet the invitation to engage with the mystery, right? To also the play that's in, the romance of orthodoxy, to borrow G.K. Chesterton. So, in terms of can the doctrine of Trinity save democracy? I think the doctrine of Trinity can save anything that allows itself to be saved by it, right? I think there's a.
Can it save Donald Trump
if he would repent?
Stephen Miller,
if he would convert and repent, right?
Christy, no.
You get, well, I don't know. Steve Miller is the farthest bridge. No, I mean, right? Don't we believe that anyone who repents can be redeemed, and maybe even some who you have to, it takes more than just repentance. Maybe some will have to take a divine act of mercy at the end of age. I don't know, but But what was your particular idea that when you came up with this very provocative title that I'm sure will just enhance your standing with the IA crowd?
ChatGPT. Bill, I'm playing to
AI crowd. AI.
ChatGPT. That I've got an audience of one right now, and that's
That's lovely.
ChatGPT. That's all I really.
No, so there's a sense where, first of all, I think a good re-engaging with Trinitarian theology would be a wonderful corrective for every branch of Christianity, including the one I'm affiliated with now. Could really use a little bit of Trinitarian theology, and I think that some divine mystery would be really helpful. It would be a wonderful thing to be infused in the religious right as well right now, because I think there's a kind of anytime you get a muscular Christianity, you're pretty sure that you've just instead of putting lipstick on a pig, you put a crucifix on a pagan. Is pretty much what you have when you have what poses as muscular Christianity. And I certainly think, I mean, the Christianity that will be that's on display often in these White House prayer meetings, but more that's kind of show. But I'm talking about the kind of what happens across churches all across America, and this kind of well, we've said the Visigoths are here. This kind of Arian Christianity posing as a born again movement, I think is remarkably detrimental to not only, I mean, the country. It certainly hurt the country, but I think it hurts the cause of Christ as well.
Well, let me tell you what I was thinking about. I was thinking a little bit about. I just read about or listened to something, and they were talking about how Francis Fukuyama, the great political scientist, posted some like a lecture by Leo Strauss, of course, great Jewish thinker who emigrated, saw the rise of Nazism in Germany, and wound up at the University of Chicago, I think, was a great sort of philosopher. And Fukuyama apparently posted some excerpts on a Substack of a lecture about German nihilism that Strauss had given years ago, and it talked about sort of this sort of anti-modern impulse of not just Nazism and National Socialism, but a lot of that he basically says, Strauss says that National Socialism was the basest form and most repugnant form of a wider sort of rejection of democratic modernity and the Weimar sort of republic. And he talks about in the excerpts of this lecture, talks about this sort of reaction against Weimar stuff. And of course, it's interesting because you go from Weimar, which is one of the most progressive things in world history, to totalitarianism, right? So things happen quickly. But
also one of the most ineffectual. I mean, it was crippled from the beginning by what the Allies laid upon.
Yeah. This goes back to Hanson's point earlier. It's very, I mean, liberal democracies are very pacifistic until they're not.
Well, and you know what? And I'm not sure how I'm not sure I would qualify the British government and the French government of 1914, and certainly not the Austrian or not the I wouldn't, and certainly not Tsarist Russia as being liberal.
Well, certainly Tsarist Russia we would.
Well, I would say, but I would still I mean, let's face it, everybody was protecting empire. You know, I mean, that was this shell game that ended up causing World War I. The Brits and French were playing it as well. I mean, so it's hard to. I remember for what was it? For one of my son's honors history class, they had to. It was like, whose fault was World War One, and they had to draw out a country, and he pulled Serbia, and he goes, all right. He just said, I said, what is the first thing you said? I go, I plead guilty. It's our fault. So that was the end of it. It's kind of hard to defend Serbia in that one, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my first principles in life. Never defend Serbia.
Never send Serbia. Yeah.
My friend Leo Leibowitz says his father, who's a famous Israeli bank robber, told him 3 things in life. It's fun. 3 principles. 1, never have a boss. 2, never point a gun at someone, a loaded gun at someone, unless you're ready to pull the trigger. And 3, if you're at a restaurant you've never been to and you don't know what to order, always get the club sandwich. And Leo said that these 3 things have served him quite well.
Can I just say, given how small Israel is, I mean, being a bank robber in Israel, that would be hard. That would be hard to get.
He was a famous guy. He would escape on a motorcycle. In fact, he was on Israeli currency at one point. Like, he's a famous guy. Leo's dad. He's
wait a minute. A bank robber was on Israeli currency?
Yes. This is. I'm going to Google this. I think this is true. Bank robber
on currency.
Currency Israel. This is terrible radio that I'm checking this, but yeah, Ronnie, it comes right up. Ronnie Leibowitz. How Israel put its most notorious bank robber on a stamp. I'm sorry, it was on a stamp. I'm sorry.
All right.
It was on a stamp. I apologize. It was on a stamp. Ronnie Leibowitz, known as Biker Bank or the Motorcycle Bandit, robbed 21 banks in the Tel Aviv area between 1989 and 1990. Yeah,
that's a pretty good run in such a small country.
I mean, well, eventually you run out of banks. You gotta move up. So anyway, so I'm sort of tracking down this Strauss stuff and reading the stuff, and then a lot of the podcasts and other commentators, mostly on the right, are talking about this because Fukuyama is sort of situated on the right, and Fukuyama is posting this stuff because he's concerned about Trumpism and he's concerned about populism, and this is not his conservatism, right? He's a sort of classical liberal,
right?
And so I found a response piece by one of your favorite thinkers over at First Things, R.R. Reno.
Oh yeah,
and Rusty.
I wonder if he's riding one. I bet you he gets to ride on one of the submarines today.
He's not a military guy, I don't think.
But he just likes tyrants. He just likes dictators and tyrants.
Hey, who doesn't? They're very well dressed oftentimes, with the exception of Kim Jong-un. Although culturally in South Asia he might look better than he does by Western standards. Not a great haircut though. He's talking about, he has a response piece, and he says basically that Fukuyama misses some key points about Strauss, which may be right. And he's talking about this moral protest that the students in Weimar have. And Reno writes this: the moral protest was not unwarranted, Strauss suggests. The problem rested in the intellectual culture of Weimar Germany and perhaps the modern West as a whole. The adolescents I am speaking of were in need of teachers who could explain to them in articulate language the positive and not merely destructive meaning of their aspirations. But this was not forthcoming. As Strauss reports, teachers in Germany were in one way or another modern themselves. They discoursed about historical contexts and taught technical subjects. In a word, education was anti-metaphysical, which is to say, progressive, as Strauss calls it. Rather than taking the moral protest seriously, professors were satisfied to point out the juvenile nature of its destructive impulse, or the incoherence of various post-liberal proposals of the time, as does Fukuyama, who, like so many others today, often says that the grave error of those who criticize liberalism rests in the fact that they are not liberal. These purported refutations amounted to, as Strauss puts it, to repetitions of things which the young people already knew by heart. The same is true today. Therein lay disaster. The nihilistic students rather needed old-fashioned teachers. They needed to feel the demands of those who spoke with an authority born of devotion to a tradition of truth that has deep roots. The antidote to nihilism is not an enumeration of warnings about intolerance and authoritarianism. It's to be found in metaphysical weight, as it were, the power to compel minds and inspire love's mania, the desire to serve the beloved, even sacrifice oneself. And then Reno says this: reason is cool. It analyzes, weighs, and judges. Strauss was a great patron of reason. He regarded it as the foundation of civilization, which he described as the conscious culture of reason. Modern civilization raises this principle to the highest level, engendering the universalism characteristic of the modern West: scientific technocratic management, the rule of law, and human rights. But Strauss knew that this achievement must be leavened by pre-modern sources and traditions if it is to endure. That strikes me as fundamentally correct. That the anti-metaphysical nature of liberalism, that ultimately this is what, there's this sense in which freedom is not just freedom from, right? It's freedom for, right? And if you just got freedom from constraint, freedom from overregulation, freedom from Big Brother in the backyard, but you have no freedom for what is the freedom unto which you've been delivered, right? What are you living for? And I think this is sort of the Achilles heel of a sort of over proceduralized classical liberalism, right? It's just sort of becomes this minimalistic, non-metaphysical, non-truth with a capital T system that's hollow, right? That doesn't really inspire anything. It's dark points becomes Ed Norton's character in Fight Club, right? Where you're sitting on the toilet just ordering stuff from IKEA and things like this, and you just don't know. I mean, I've said this. I think I've said this on the podcast. Like, what did Kamala Harris? What was the alternative to Make America Great Again? It was, look, we're going to get a better account. We'll keep liberalism and capitalism alive, and we'll have trans bathrooms too. I mean, there wasn't. I mean, Trump was offering something metaphysical that was dark metaphysics, right? I mean, it was, but there was something there that was evocative of a bigger picture, of something collective, of something, and that to me is where maybe the Trinity is needed to save democracy. Maybe you need something that is a theory of everything. It's a view of society, of reality. That I love what Reno says there. It's to be found in metaphysical weight, as it were, the power to compel minds and inspire love's mania, the desire to serve the beloved, even to sacrifice oneself. That to me is the God in trance vision, right? That somebody like Edwards sees, in Trinitarian reality. That, Bill, may be what we need.
Well, our good friend Tomas Halik in his latest book says, God remains an impenetrable mystery, and God's actions in the depths of the human heart is also hidden. He goes on to say, but Christian theology identifies the point where mutual human and divine openness meets as the person of Jesus Christ. This fulfillment of meaning of our humanity happens not only when we say, Lord, Lord to Jesus, but wherever they live in a manner that fulfills God's will. And then finally, at the end of this chapter, he says, the God whom I believe is present in our world primarily through prayer and the work of human beings, through human responses to God impulses, traditionally the action of grace, and through the life of faith, hope, and love. Theologically speaking, faith, hope, and love are not merely human attitudes, but a place of encounter and essential connection, perikiosis, between the divine and the human, between grace and freedom, between heaven and earth. It's interesting. This week, it's too hard to explain what it was, but I basically was in a dramatic reading of a guy who works for a international think tank. He was on Kissinger's staff years ago, and he wrote this play. AI basically is on trial, and it was a reader's theater, and then the audience was the jury, which was kind of interesting. So it's like 120 people came to this thing. But one of the guys, and I'm still
Was
not
there a
sure.
green room? Was there a green room? Did you did you have a dressing room or anything?
We
As
didn't
an
have to.
actor?
We didn't have a dressing room, but I was an expert witness. I was an engineer who
How many
defended
lines did you have?
AI. 20?
You had 20 lines. Did you memorize them?
No, it was Reader's Theater. We all read it.
Yeah.
But they actually had professional actors who had the main parts. But anyway, but one of the guys involved, I'm not sure. My guess is he's a spy. He was a spy at one point because
You really took the wind out of his. I was imagining you memorizing lines and backstage and stuff.
Yeah, I know. Well, none of us had to, right? So it really.
When you tell the story next, I would embellish that part.
I will. Okay. Right. Well, I have a little
Yeah,
time.
I
to
would
embellish.
just. I
Like I
would
told
make it
someone the
more
other
like
day,
community theater. I would say community.
by 10 years, by like 20 years from now, I will be in the room voting for the Pope. Right?
You were
I won't really
nominated. You were nominated for a Tony.
I was nominated for a Tony. But regardless, I just one guy who was helping put the play on, and he's does magic, but he's kind of he knew everybody. He has all kinds of interesting relationships with people internationally, and one of the things he said to, he says, he came and he says, do you know about it? He said, you know history of stuff, right? I go, well, that's kind of broad, but he started
You
talking
know,
about
you know, history
history of
of
stuff.
stuff. It sounds like
That's,
something from Bill and Ted's Excellent
I
Adventure.
know it really does, but this guy was more articulate than that, but he spoke so quickly. But one of the things he said that modern theology or modern educational theory, he says, is based on occult paganism. And he says, he mentioned one of those early 20th century British spiritualist writers and about the idea that we all are stars. You know, it's kind of that Gnostic idea that ends up that he says that there's a direct line between that and everybody getting a trophy for participation. But this is what he says that I thought was really interesting. He goes, when your whole life you've been just being affirmed for nothing and you haven't done anything. And he says, what that creates, some people, it turns them into sociopaths. But he said, why are so many kids who have been their whole life raised to say you are the center of the universe so anxious, high suicide rates, horrible self-images? Because it's almost like we imprint on them the fraud syndrome. Because
the imposter syndrome,
the
right?
imposter, yeah. And it was an interesting.
That's really interesting.
It's
That is interesting.
And it's an interesting idea. Now, again, I mean, but what that got me thinking about was, well, I've always asked this before, why, when someone says you're a person of worth, and I always say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that you're a person of worth? And that it really does. You have to root that. There's really no modern way to root that, right? You need a pre-modern idea on some levels because
Because
there's no, from an evolutionary perspective, that's not really true. I mean, you can't really argue that from any kind of materialist point of view. You have to go, and that's part of why people who have rejected Christianity, you know, the English theorist of the early 20th century, that's part of why they drifted towards occultism, right? I mean, that's kind of broadly speaking, there's a lot of reasons people were interested in that in the early 20th century. I mean, Charles Williams was interested in that, and he was a Christian. But I think that's an interesting thing to your point, because why do we have all this New Age stuff, which is basically it creates a myth about being ancient, because none of it is ancient, and yet they killed God, right? It's Nietzsche. They killed God, and so they need to find
doesn't go away. It doesn't go away.
They need to find a new.
You can't. God is like the ultimate X. You can't delete the number.
Right, and so that's why you end up creating.
This is Ross Douthat's theory, right? In that book, Bad Religion.
Yeah.
Like basically,
exactly.
what you do is you will get the foo-foo crystals on the left, and on the right you'll get Christian nationalism. You'll get this stuff that will fill the gap, right? You're not. Right. It's not like they basically enlightened skepticism, and this is sort of what Rusty Reno was saying that Strauss knew, right? That people want deep affect, something deep affective connection, and they need something mysterious and big and yeah, ancient. Probably, I mean, it's an interesting word for it, but they need something venerable and serious and beautiful. And there's just a yeah, I mean, I think without something like that. No, I mean, I think I was listening on the Clubhouse app to some guy who was just a presuppositionalist jerk off, but I repeat myself. But no, but there is something to this where even basic understanding of reality is so Trinitarian, right? That I was reading, and he was challenging this atheist who I knew and like as a friend of mine, and he was saying, well, and this guy, how these guys are like, well, I mean, if you're an atheist, how do you ground? If you have no ground, transcendental ground of unity university, how do you separate? How do you exist? How do you understand how things, and I said, I don't think he gets what you're saying. I mean, I think it's what you're saying. How do you know that you're not the coffee cup? Or how do which is something, it's actually a legitimate question, but I was rereading yesterday some of stuff from Peter Leithart's book on the Trinity, which is interesting. And he says, go back to the beginning, glance around the room. He's referring to the beginning of the chapter of the book. What's there? There's a collection of objects that can be distinguished from one another. The cup is not the coffee, is not the table, is not the lamp, is not the computer screen. Yet together they form a little village of objects. Together they form an environment, and that environment determines what the objects are as much as the objects make up the environment. My cup is not the coffee, but if the cup never held the coffee, and especially if it were incapable of holding coffee, it wouldn't be much of a coffee cup. The lamp is a lamp because it illumines the things I want to see on my desk. It's not the same as the things on my desk. They don't mush together into an undifferentiated mass, but the lamp isn't much of a lamp without the other objects that it makes visible. The window in front of me is a window because of its particular properties. It's made of transparent glass and has metal and plastic frames to hold the glass in place. But it wouldn't be a window without the rest of the house. To be a window, it needs the wall and the light that passes through the window. The wall isn't the window, nor is the light. But without the wall and the light, the window would not be a window. Things are defined not only in themselves, but also by their relations with other things. That's such a mundane example of Trinitarian ontology, that our whole reality is the one in the many in organic connection, right? That something like the understanding, if the Christian tradition is right, of God and who God is even before creation, that metaphysical reality, that ontological reality undergirds what Leithart is saying there. Is just basic in perceiving his living room. Now that is fascinating and interesting and engaging. And you start to think of what are the implications for me and you being distinct and yet organically related, right? What does it tell us about community? What does it tell us about the nature of society? What does it tell us about how we indwell one another and how we balance out the creative tension between the one and the many and these sorts of things. And so I think this is where Trinity, the Trinity is something that's so, again, as Leithart said, so undergirds how we just intuitively make sense of the world we live in a way that I think no other ontological reality does.
And I think so. And I think I was, I mean, you have to a little church history, but if you think about the logical ramifications of the ideas that were condemned as heresy. I mean, I heard someone the other day praising Marcionite. Again, it wasn't our
where where?
from Vermont.
It's making its way north.
Making its way east, north and east, right? But the logic of Marcion, or the logic of Arius, right? and we don't have to go too far to see. You don't have to go too far to see full-blown representations of both of those, right? You don't
even have to cross state lines right now.
You don't have to cross state lines now. So I think there's a sense of exactly the dynamic communal nature of Christian monotheism, and I think the dynamic nature, is such. And I think part of it, what's good about that too, is, and Halik says this in another spot in his new book. He says there's a reason when Paul was in Athens, the idol that or the altar he chose to speak from was the unknown God.
Yeah.
And so this idea that this unknown God is constantly revealing, right? The unknown God is constantly known in relationship. That the one is a dynamic one that manifests in Trinitarian ways. Again, almost everything once you see it everywhere, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Leonhardt's book is great with this, about just looking at this sort of an homage to Augustine, but looking at just how this sort of indwelling penetrates all of it. You can't get away from it.
Well, and it's interesting, the Neoplatonist that he was, Augustine, but boldly was asked us to engage in this kind of thought exercise, right? And my favorite one. I mean, the idea, I don't think it's accidental that Halik keeps coming back to the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. And I think also this idea of it wasn't Augustine's favorite analogy, but it's mine, where ultimately the Trinity is known. God is love, and in love there's always three, right?
Yeah, love,
the
lover, the beloved, the love, the love, the lover, and the love, right?
Love,
the lover, the beloved,
right? Yeah. Well, happy Trinity Sunday, my friend. And
happy Trinity Sunday.
We do pray for peace. We also pray for every life that was the people that got killed because they were trying to serve the public in Minnesota, and we hope that there'll be no more violence that way. All right, peace.
Amen to that.